The text came in just after midnight. We think it's best if you don't stay here anymore. Vanessa needs space. I stood there in the guest room, phone in my hand, one suitcase still open on the bed. I hadn't even finished unpacking. The lamp beside me hummed softly, and somewhere down the hall I could hear my son laughing at something on television, completely unaware that his message had just redrawn the lines of our relationship. My name is Frank Holloway. I was 64 years old at the time, a retired logistics company founder, a widower, and the man who paid for the roof over his head. I read the message again, slower this time. Not I think, not this is hard for me, just we think and Vanessa needs. A decision delivered through my son, but clearly not made by him. I didn't feel angry, that surprised me. What I felt was a quiet sting, the kind that settles in your chest when you realize you've been repositioned without being consulted. Father to problem, guest to inconvenience. My eyes drifted to the closet where my coat hung, and beyond that my thoughts went home to a locked filing cabinet I hadn't opened in years. I smiled to myself just slightly. Funny how quickly family becomes tenant. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, because arguments are for people who forgot what they still own, and my son had forgotten something important. The question was, how long would it take him to remember? It started earlier that evening, before the text, before the silence settled in. Just pack light, Vanessa had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're keeping things simple this week. I nodded and didn't think much of it at the time. I was used to adjusting, used to being flexible. That's what you do when you're a guest in your son's home, or so I thought. Dinner was already underway when I came downstairs. The table was full. Vanessa's sister was there, her husband, a couple of friends I hadn't met before. Wine glasses clinked. Conversation flowed easily, skipping right over me like I wasn't quite part of the circle. At one point, someone asked how long I'd be staying. Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed lightly. Oh, just a few days. Frank likes to travel light. A few people smiled politely, someone nodded. I felt it then, that subtle shift. The way the word just landed. The way a few days sounded like a courtesy, not a welcome. Caleb caught my eye across the table. For a second I thought he might say something, clarify, correct it. He didn't. The conversation moved on. Vacation plans, renovation ideas, a story about a neighbor's new car. I sat there, smiling when appropriate, lifting my glass when others did, shrinking without making a sound. Later, when the plates were cleared, Vanessa leaned over and said quietly, "We've been trying to set better boundaries lately. Nothing personal." Nothing personal, that phrase has a way of doing the opposite of what it promises. After dinner, people lingered in the living room. Laughter again, someone put on music. I excused myself and went back upstairs, suddenly very aware of how temporary everything felt. My suitcase sat open exactly where I'd left it. Then the text came. The words were polite, careful, measured, and unmistakably final. That was when I understood. I hadn't been asked to pack light because they cared about convenience. I'd been asked to prepare to leave. I closed the suitcase and zipped it slowly, deliberately. Each sound felt louder than it should have. Down the hall, the television volume went up. Life continued without me. As I carried my bag toward the door, Vanessa appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "You're heading out?" she asked, feigning surprise. "Yes," I said simply. She nodded like this was confirmation of something she'd already decided. Probably for the best. "What?" Caleb stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. That hurt more than anything else. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I loaded my bag into the trunk and paused before getting in. The house glowed warmly behind me, a house I'd walked through empty years earlier, imagining my son's future inside it. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was reclassified, not as a father, not as family, as an inconvenience that needed managing. I drove away slowly, the streetlights reflecting off the windshield like quiet reminders. When I got home, I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't pour a drink. I went straight to my study. There, against the far wall, stood a filing cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Locked, heavy, familiar. I rested my hand on it and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I remembered the day I signed the paperwork. The check I wrote without hesitation. The words temporary solution spoken casually across a polished desk. I remembered trusting that family meant permanence. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet, one thing became very clear. The moment they decided I was temporary was the moment everything changed. And they had no idea what I was about to remember. I didn't buy the house because I wanted control. I bought it because my son sounded tired. Caleb was 37 when he came to me, sitting across the kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He'd been married to Vanessa for less than a year, already juggling a mortgage rejection, a new job that hadn't stabilized yet, and a wife who hated the word waiting. "The bank won't approve us," he said quietly. "Not yet." Vanessa sat beside him, posture straight, expression calm but tight. "They want 2 more years of consistent income, credit history too." I didn't hesitate. I'll handle it, I said. They both looked up at the same time. I can buy the place outright, I continued. No mortgage, no pressure, you refinance later when things settle. Vanessa smiled first. That would be incredible. Caleb exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Dad, are you sure? I'd spent 40 years building a logistics company from nothing. Warehouses, trucks. Contracts that lived and died by timing. I knew what stability looked like and I knew when family needed it. We found the house together, quiet neighborhood, good schools, a driveway wide enough for future memories. I walked through it imagining holidays, birthdays, the life my son would build inside. At the closing, the lawyer suggested a clean structure. Put it under your LLC for now, she said. Until they refinance, keeps everything simple. Temporary, that word again, I signed without a second thought. At first, everything felt right. I stopped by occasionally, brought tools, helped with small repairs. Vanessa thanked me every time, calling me thoughtful, generous. Caleb joked that I was their safety net, but gratitude doesn't age well when comfort sets in. Slowly, the language changed. Vanessa stopped saying thank you and started saying we decided. She referred to the place as our house in conversations where I stood right there. When friends visited, she talked about how hard they worked to get it. Caleb never corrected her. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was normal. They lived there, of course it felt like theirs. That's how entitlement grows, quietly, politely, without resistance. Refinancing came up once, maybe twice. Rates aren't great right now, Caleb said one year. We're in no rush, Vanessa added smoothly. I nodded. Whenever you're ready. Years passed, renovations began without much discussion. New flooring, electrical changes, walls moved. I asked once if permits were pulled. Vanessa laughed. You worry too much. What? Caleb smiled and changed the subject. And I let it go because I wasn't interested in power. I was interested in peace. I believed that family would naturally balance itself. What I didn't realize was that silence doesn't preserve balance, it shifts it. By the time Vanessa started setting boundaries, the house had stopped being a gift and started being leverage. Not mine, hers. When she spoke about it, there was ownership in her voice that didn't come from paperwork. It came from assumption. And assumptions grow dangerous when no one corrects them. The night I was asked to pack light, I didn't think about deeds or documents right away. I thought about how easy it had been for them to forget. But later, alone in my study, I opened the filing cabinet. I found the folder. The original purchase agreement. The LLC records the deed, my name, my company, no amendments, no transfers, no refinancing documents. Nothing had changed, not legally, not ever. I sat there for a long time, the paper resting in my hands, feeling something settle into place. Not anger, not satisfaction, clarity. The house I bought to keep the peace had become the thing used to push me out. And the irony was almost laughable, because while everyone had been acting like ownership was a feeling, the deed was still a fact. And facts don't care how comfortable someone feels. That was the moment I understood exactly how temporary their certainty really was, and how permanent my position still remained. It didn't happen all at once. If it had, I might have pushed back sooner. The first time I noticed it clearly was at a neighborhood barbecue Vanessa insisted on hosting. New grill, new patio furniture, a show of arrival. I stood near the cooler nursing a soda when one of the neighbors, a tall man named Rick, smiled at me and said, "So, Frank, how long have you lived around here?" I opened my mouth to answer. "Oh, not long," Vanessa said quickly, stepping between us. "We moved in a few years ago. It's been such a journey." She laughed lightly, like she'd just saved the conversation from an awkward detour. Rick nodded, already turning his attention back to her. "You've done a great job with the place." "Thank you," she replied. "It took a lot of work." A lot of work, she meant. I stood there, invisible, my sentence never finished. I told myself it was nothing, social awkwardness, excitement, pride. I'd been around long enough to know people interrupt without thinking, but then it kept happening. At a dinner with Vanessa's parents, her mother asked me what I did before retiring. "He was in logistics," Vanessa said before I could respond. "Very corporate, very numbers." She smiled as if that summary was generous. Her father nodded politely. "Must have been busy." "It was," I said, finally finding a gap. Vanessa reached for her wine. "Oh, constantly," she added, already steering the conversation elsewhere. Caleb sat beside her, quiet, smiling, letting it happen. That silence started to bother me more than the interruptions. I began to notice how often Vanessa spoke for him too. If someone asked Caleb a question, she'd answer it first, then look at him like he was meant to confirm it. "We're thinking of remodeling the kitchen," she'd say. "We don't really need help with that," she'd say. "We like to keep visits planned," she'd say. "Always we, always confident, always final." Caleb would nod. Sometimes when we were alone, I'd test it gently. "You sure that's what you want?" I asked him once after she announced a decision I knew they hadn't discussed with me. He shrugged. "It's easier this way." Easier, that word stuck with me. At another gathering, this one larger, louder, someone complimented the house and asked how they'd managed to buy in such a competitive area. Before I could stop myself, I said, "Well, I helped at the beginning." Vanessa laughed sharp and quick. "Oh, Frank likes to tell that story." The room went quiet for a split second. I smiled thinly. "It's not much of a story." She tilted her head. "Exactly." Laughter followed, polite, uneasy. I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't embarrassment, it was recognition. This wasn't accidental anymore. I started watching more closely. The way she positioned herself between me and others, the way she reframed conversations, the way she used humor to make me seem outdated, unnecessary, overly involved. And the way Caleb stayed silent through all of it. That silence hurt more than the jokes, because jokes pass, silence endorses. The clearest moment came one afternoon when I stopped by the house to return a tool Caleb had borrowed. I rang the bell, no answer. I could see movement through the window. Vanessa noticed me first. She leaned toward Caleb and said something I couldn't hear. He looked at the door, then away. My phone buzzed. "Now's not a good time. Please check before coming over." No greeting, no explanation, just instruction. I sat in my car afterward, hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling a strange mix of sadness and clarity. This wasn't about boundaries. It was about control over access, over narrative, over who belonged, and I no longer did. On the drive home, I replayed the past year in my head like a timeline snapping into focus. The interruptions, the summaries, the jokes, the silence. The decisions made without me, it wasn't random, it was systematic. Vanessa wasn't pushing me out loudly. She was editing me out quietly, replacing my voice with her own, one conversation at a time. And Caleb, whether out of fear, habit, or exhaustion, was letting it happen. That night, sitting alone in my living room, I realized something important. You can forgive a lot of things, but when someone stops speaking for themselves, they're no longer choosing peace. They're choosing comfort. And comfort has a way of erasing people who don't fit neatly into it. By then, the pattern wasn't forming. It was already complete. And once you see a pattern clearly, you have only two options: accept your place inside it, or change the game entirely. I didn't fight back because fighting would have meant accepting the role they'd already assigned me. The night after I was told to pack light, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Caleb. "I think things just got a little tense," he wrote. "Let's all cool down." I stared at the message for a long moment before replying with a single word: understood. That was it, no defense, no explanation, no reminder of who I was or what I'd done for him. I set the phone down and waited for the feeling people always warn you about, the regret, the fear that you've just given up your ground. It never came. What came instead was clarity. I'd spent my entire career watching negotiations play out. The loudest person in the room was almost never the one with leverage. They were the one trying to manufacture urgency, to provoke emotion, to force a reaction that could be used against the other side. Vanessa wanted a reaction. Anger would have proved her right. Begging would have justified her control. Even explaining myself would have put me in a defensive position I didn't belong in. So I stayed quiet, not the quiet of defeat, but the quiet of someone stepping back to see the full board. That night I sat in my study with the lights off, the glow from the street lamp spilling across the floor. I didn't open the filing cabinet yet. I didn't need to. I already knew what was in there. What mattered more was what had shifted inside me. For years, my silence had been about peace, about keeping things smooth, about avoiding uncomfortable conversations that might strain relationships. This silence was different. This was restraint, and restraint is not passive. It's intentional. I thought about every moment I'd stayed quiet while being interrupted, every time I'd smiled through a joke that minimized me, every time I'd chosen not to correct a narrative because it felt easier than disrupting the room. I realized something uncomfortable. My silence had trained them. It had taught Vanessa that she could speak for me. It had taught Caleb that he didn't have to speak at all. And it had taught both of them that I would absorb whatever discomfort they needed me to carry. That ended that night, not with a confrontation, with a decision. I wasn't going to argue my way back into relevance. I wasn't going to demand respect from people who found it inconvenient. I was going to let reality do the work. I finally opened the filing cabinet. The drawer slid out smoothly, the folders exactly where I'd left them years ago. Documents age differently than relationships. They don't forget, they don't reinterpret, they don't soften over time. I flipped through them slowly, not to reassure myself, but to remind myself. I didn't feel powerful holding those papers. I felt grounded. There's a difference. Power wants to be seen. Groundedness doesn't need witnesses. I closed the drawer and leaned back in my chair, hands folded, breathing steady. I wasn't angry at my son. I wasn't even angry at Vanessa. What I felt was resolve, the kind that comes when you finally accept that avoiding conflict can be its own form of surrender. I wasn't going to surrender anymore, but I also wasn't going to rush. Time favors people who don't panic. Over the next few days, I said very little. I declined invitations politely. I didn't respond to online noise. I didn't explain my absence to extended family. I watched instead, and what I saw confirmed everything. Vanessa filled the silence with narratives. Caleb filled it with avoidance. Neither of them asked why I wasn't reacting. They assumed silence meant compliance. That assumption was their mistake. Sometime around 3 in the morning, lying awake and staring at the ceiling, the final piece settled into place. A line, not one I would announce. Not one I would threaten with, a private line, a deadline. I decided how long I was willing to remain quiet, how long I'd allow them to operate under false certainty, how long I'd let my restraint be mistaken for weakness. I didn't mark it on a calendar, I didn't tell anyone, I didn't even say it out loud, I just knew. And once you know that, once you draw that line internally, everything changes. Your silence stops being empty, it starts carrying weight. I fell asleep calmer than I'd been in months. Because when you stop reacting and start choosing your moment, you're no longer at the mercy of other people's decisions. You're waiting. And waiting, when done right, is not hesitation, it's preparation. The deadline had formed, and when it arrived, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd simply step forward. I showed up on a Thursday afternoon. No warning, no text, no call. The sky was overcast, the kind that makes neighborhoods feel quieter than they are. I parked in the driveway like I always had, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting calmly on the wheel. No anger, no nerves, just purpose. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. Caleb stood there, eyes widening the instant he saw me. "Dad," he said, voice pitching upward. What are you doing here?" "I was in the area," I replied evenly, "thought I'd stop by." His gaze flicked past me toward the driveway, then back inside the house. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "You should have texted," he said quickly. "Probably," I said. That single word unsettled him. He stepped aside anyway, almost without realizing it, and I walked in. The house smelled faintly of fresh paint and something citrusy, cleaner maybe, new throw pillows, rearranged furniture, changes made with confidence, not caution. Vanessa wasn't home. Caleb exhaled in relief he didn't bother hiding. "She's out," he said. "She didn't know you were coming." "I figured," I replied. We stood there awkwardly until I took off my coat and draped it over the chair like I belonged there, because in a way I still did. "Do you want coffee?" he asked, already backing toward the kitchen. "No," I said, "I won't be long." That made him pause. I sat down at the table, slowly, deliberately. People underestimate how much power there is in sitting first. Caleb remained standing, hands fidgeting. "Dad, about the other night." "You asked me for space," I said calmly. "I gave it." "Well, yeah, but..." "And now I'm here," I continued, briefly. His jaw tightened. "Vanessa's not going to like this." "I'm not here for her," I said. "I'm here for you." That landed. He pulled out a chair and sat, leaning forward like he was bracing for impact. "Okay," he said, "say what you need to say." I looked around the room. "You've made a lot of changes." He nodded. "We've been fixing things up." "Did you pull permits for the electrical work?" I asked conversationally. He blinked. "Why are you asking that?" "Because it matters," I replied, "especially when things are still under my company." The silence that followed was immediate and heavy. "You're what?" he asked. I met his eyes. "My company." He laughed once, sharp and nervous. "Dad, that's not funny." "I'm not joking," I said gently. He leaned back, confusion spreading across his face. "The house is ours." "You live here," I said. "That's not the same thing." His breath caught. "Vanessa said the paperwork was done." "I'm sure she did," I replied. He stood abruptly and started pacing. "Why would she lie about that?" "I didn't say she lied," I said. "I said ownership and assumption aren't the same thing." He stopped pacing. "You never corrected us." "I didn't need to," I said. "Nothing had changed." Until now. He rubbed his face with both hands. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you should slow down," I replied, "before more decisions are made." "Are you threatening us?" he asked, voice strained. "No," I said, "I'm informing you." That was when panic finally broke through his composure. "Dad," he said quietly, "this is our home." "I know," I said. "That's why I wanted you to hear this from me calmly." He looked up. "Then why now?" I stood and picked up my coat. "Because something changed." "What?" he asked. "You told me not to show up," I said. "That turns assumptions into problems." I paused at the door and looked back at him. "You might want to talk to Vanessa," I added, "soon." He nodded numbly. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. A message from Vanessa sent just minutes earlier. "Where are you?" I didn't reply. I drove away slowly, watching the house disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel guilt. I felt balance returning, because in that short visit something important had shifted. Caleb now knew, if only vaguely, that the ground beneath him wasn't as solid as he'd believed, and once someone realizes that, they stop standing so confidently. Ownership hadn't been announced, it had been mentioned, casually, and that made all the difference. I didn't order the inspection out of spite. I ordered it because once assumptions collapse, facts have a way of demanding attention. 2 days after my visit, I called Elaine Porter, the attorney who'd helped structure my company years earlier. Her voice was the same as always, calm, efficient, uninterested in drama. "Do you want a casual look?" she asked, "or a formal inspection?" "Formal," I said, "by the book." There was a pause. "That escalates things." "As I know." The inspector arrived the following Monday morning. Licensed, documented, neutral. I wasn't there when he walked through the house. I didn't need to be. Distance keeps things clean. What I received instead was a report, 43 pages. I read it slowly, once through without stopping. Then again, pen in hand, unpermitted electrical rewiring, load-bearing wall modified without approval, plumbing changes that violated local code, roof work done by an unlicensed contractor. And beneath all of it, a running estimate of repair costs that climbed higher with every page. By the time I reached the end, my jaw was tight, not from anger but from disappointment. They hadn't just taken liberties, they'd taken risks. Risks with a property they didn't legally own. Elaine called that afternoon. "It's not minor," she said plainly. "Some of this could expose the owner to liability." "I am the owner," I reminded her. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly the concern." I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For years, I'd worried about being seen as controlling, overbearing, involved. I'd stepped back intentionally, believing trust would protect what paperwork could not. Instead, my restraint had become permission. That evening, my phone rang. Vanessa's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. A minute later, a text followed. "We need to talk now." I waited another 10 minutes before responding. "Tomorrow is fine." The reply came instantly. "This is serious, Frank." So was silence. The next day, she called again, this time from a different number. When I answered, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "You ordered an inspection," she said. "Yes." "You had no rights." I smiled faintly. "That's incorrect." "You're trying to intimidate us," she snapped. "This is harassment." "It's documentation," I replied. "There's a difference." "You're going to ruin us," she said. "Do you have any idea what this could do?" "I do," I said calmly. "That's why I'm paying attention now." She inhaled sharply. "If you push this further, I won't stay quiet." "About what?" I asked. There was a beat of silence. "About how controlling you've been," she said. "How you use money to manipulate, how you show up uninvited and make people uncomfortable." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Is that what you plan to say?" "What?" "I'm warning you," she replied. "People will listen." "They might," I said, "eventually." Her voice dropped. "You think you're untouchable?" "No," I said, "I think I'm documented." She hung up on me. That night I received screenshots from a friend. A post Vanessa had shared privately, carefully worded, just vague enough to avoid specifics. Sometimes the hardest part of adulthood is setting boundaries with people who confuse control for love. No names, no accusations, just implication. The comments came quickly, supportive, encouraging. People love a story with a clear villain even when the outline is fuzzy. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything to Elaine. She replied with a single sentence. "If she goes public, we go factual." That's when I understood what Vanessa didn't. Exposure only works when the other side is hiding. I wasn't hiding anything. The inspection report sat neatly on my desk, tabs marking every violation. The permits or lack of them, the estimated costs, the legal responsibility. All of it pointed in one direction. I didn't need to threaten her. I didn't need to counter her narrative online. I didn't need to defend my reputation with words. The truth was already assembled. Vanessa thought noise would give her leverage. She didn't realize that the louder she got, the more attention she'd draw to the parts of the story she couldn't control. Because now this wasn't about family tension. It was about property law. And the moment she chose exposure as a weapon, she stepped into territory where emotion didn't matter. Only evidence did. The question wasn't whether she'd follow through. It was how far she'd push before realizing she was standing on ground she didn't own. And when that realization came, it wouldn't be quiet. It would be undeniable. She didn't wait long. 2 days after our last call, my phone began to vibrate nonstop, not with messages meant for me, but notifications from people who suddenly thought I should hear what was being said about me. Vanessa hadn't named me. She didn't have to. Her post was long, emotional, and carefully crafted. Words like control, emotional pressure, toxic family dynamics. She talked about the courage it takes to set boundaries with someone who uses financial help as a leash. She wrote about protecting her marriage, about choosing peace. She ended it with a line that stuck out to me. Some people confuse ownership with authority. Within an hour, the comments multiplied. Friends of friends, people I'd never met. Strangers offering encouragement, validation, praise for her strength. Caleb didn't comment. That hurt more than the post itself. By the end of the day, the story had grown legs, subtle shares, vague reposts, a narrative forming without facts, fueled entirely by tone and timing. I read everything once, then I closed the app. Silence has a way of driving people mad when they expect resistance. The next morning, Elaine called. She's building a public record, she said, carefully. I noticed, I replied, you haven't responded. No. A pause, good. I raised an eyebrow, good. What? People assume silence means guilt, she said. Until it doesn't, right now she's talking to an audience that doesn't know the full picture, let her. I looked out the window at my quiet street, a man walking his dog, a delivery truck passing by, the world continuing as usual. She wants me to react, I said. Yes, Elaine replied, because reaction gives her something to push against. And if I don't? Then she keeps escalating, Elaine said, which is useful. That word again, useful. By the third day, the tone of Vanessa's posts sharpened. She mentioned elder manipulation, conditional generosity. The implication grew heavier, the language more confident. People began reaching out directly. One cousin wrote, I hope you're okay. An old colleague asked, is everything all right at home? I responded to none of them. Instead, I forwarded everything to Elaine, screenshots, dates, comments. By the end of the week, my file had grown thick. Elaine called again Friday afternoon. She's not venting, she said. She's positioning. For what? Leverage, she replied. Public sympathy, pressure, possibly to scare you into backing off. I smiled faintly. She's assuming I'm afraid of opinion. Elaine didn't laugh. That assumption is dangerous for her. How so? Because once accusations are public, they invite scrutiny, she said. And scrutiny works both ways. I leaned back in my chair, so what's the move? There was a pause longer than usual. I think it's time we stop reacting entirely, Elaine said slowly. And start learning. Learning what? What she hasn't told you, she replied. What she may not want anyone to know. I understood immediately. You're suggesting. A private investigator, Elaine finished. The word landed heavier than I expected. I wasn't proud of the idea. I'd built my life on transparency, contracts, clear terms, handshakes that meant something, but this wasn't about pride anymore. This was about truth. Is that necessary? I asked. Elaine was quiet for a moment. When someone turns personal conflict into public narrative, they've already escalated. Information is the only equalizer. I thought about Vanessa's confidence, her certainty, the way she spoke as if the ground beneath her feet was solid and permanent. People who are careful with their past don't invite investigation. Do it, I said finally. Elaine exhaled. I'll make the call. That night another post went up. This one shorter, sharper. Silence doesn't mean innocence. I read it once, then turned off my phone and went to bed. I slept better than I had in weeks. Because while Vanessa was busy convincing strangers of her version of events, she had no idea what was quietly being assembled in the background. She thought public opinion was power. She didn't realize she'd just given me permission to look where no one else had bothered to check. And once you start pulling on the right thread, the truth doesn't unravel slowly. It comes apart all at once. The only question now was what we'd find. And whether my son would be ready to see it when the time came. The file arrived on a Tuesday morning. Elaine didn't email it. She didn't summarize it over the phone. She drove it over herself, set it on my desk, and waited until I'd finished reading the label before she spoke. Before you open this, she said, you need to understand something. What's inside may explain a lot, but it won't feel good. I nodded. I didn't ask for it to feel good. The folder was thinner than I expected. That should have been a relief. It was. The first page was simple enough. A timeline, names, dates, addresses. I scanned it quickly, then slower, my jaw tightening as patterns emerged. Vanessa hadn't just struggled financially before meeting Caleb. She decycled 2 previous marriages, both ending within 3 years. Both followed by property disputes that never quite reached court but left paper trails, civil complaints quietly settled, leases broken, assets liquidated under pressure. Credit card debt consolidated, then rebuilt, then consolidated again. A business venture that failed but left behind unpaid contractors. A personal loan forgiven under hardship circumstances. Each time she moved cities, each time she moved in with someone else, I turned the page. There it was, the same structure: marry, stabilize, control the narrative, secure living arrangements, exit, clean, or attempt to. My stomach tightened, not with anger but with something closer to grief. She's done this before, I said quietly. Elaine nodded. Not identically, but the pattern is there. What? I flipped further, notes from the investigator, careful language, no speculation, just facts. Vanessa had never owned property in her own name for longer than 18 months. Every time a house entered the picture, her financial position improved just long enough to leverage the next move. And then came the section that made my breath catch. A note dated months before the inspection. Inquiry made regarding title transfer requirements in case of separation. I read it twice. She asked about transferring ownership. I said, she asked about options, Elaine replied, hypothetical ones. Of course she had. The house wasn't just a place to live. It was her exit plan. I closed the folder and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt sick because somewhere in all of this my son had stopped being a partner and started being a stepping stone, and he didn't even know it. She married him for the house, I said flatly. Elaine chose her words carefully. She married him knowing the house existed and that control over it was possible. That distinction mattered. It made it worse. I rubbed my temples. Does Caleb know any of this? No, Elaine said, and that's the problem. For the first time since this began, I hesitated. Not because of fear, because of him. Caleb wasn't malicious. He wasn't calculating. He was tired, eager to keep the peace, afraid of conflict. The kind of man who mistakes quiet for harmony and doesn't realize when silence is being used against him. If I showed him this file, it would shatter the illusion he was still clinging to. But if I did, he'd lose everything anyway, and he wouldn't understand why. Once he sees this, I said slowly, there's no going back. Elaine nodded. That's why it has to be his choice. I looked down at the folder again, all those pages, all those lives intersecting, collapsing, restarting somewhere else. Vanessa's confidence suddenly made sense. She'd done this before. She believed she knew how it ended. What she didn't realize was that she'd misjudged the one variable she couldn't control: me. I didn't rush to call Caleb. I didn't send screenshots. I didn't hint or warn or test the waters. I waited, because information, when delivered too early, gets dismissed. It needs timing. 2 nights later, Caleb called. Dad, he said, voice strained. Vanessa's really upset. She thinks you're trying to ruin us. I closed my eyes briefly. Is that what you think? Silence. I don't know what to think anymore, he admitted. Things keep escalating. They will, I said gently, until someone stops pretending this is about feelings. What is it about then? He asked. I inhaled slowly. It's about reality. Another pause. I need to see you, I continued. Just you. Why? Because there are things you deserve to know, I said, and things you need to decide. His voice wavered. About what? I glanced at the closed folder on my desk. About who you trust, I said, and what happens next. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. Okay, he said. When? I replied. After we hung up, I sat there alone, listening to the house settle around me. The file I'd hoped didn't exist sat within arm's reach. I wished briefly that it truly hadn't, but wishing doesn't change facts. And facts were about to force a choice my son had been avoiding for a long time. The next move wouldn't be mine alone, it would be his, and once he made it, nothing would be the same again. I laid the documents out slowly, one by one, across the dining table. Not dramatically. Not all at once, just enough space between each page to let the silence do its work. Caleb sat across from me, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. He hadn't even taken his coat off. He looked like someone who planned to leave quickly, just in case the conversation went somewhere he didn't want to follow. What is all this? He asked, forcing a light tone. Read, I said. He picked up the first page. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower. The casual confidence he'd walked in with faded almost immediately. This doesn't mean anything, he said, setting it down. Anyone can have debt history. Keep going, I replied. He grabbed the next document, then the next. A credit summary, a prior address list, dates that overlapped in ways that couldn't be coincidence. His jaw tightened. Dad, you're digging into her past. I'm looking at facts, I said. There's a difference. He shook his head. You're misreading this. Vanessa explained some of this already. She had a rough start. People recover. I agree, I said calmly. That's why I kept reading. I slid one final page toward him, the inquiry about title transfer. He froze. The room went quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I watched his face change in stages, confusion first, then discomfort, then something closer to fear. She wouldn't, he started, then stopped. She asked, I said, months ago, before any of this happened. He swallowed hard. That doesn't prove intent. No, I said, but it shows timing. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. You're twisting this. I'm laying it out, I replied. What you do with it is up to you. His voice rose slightly. You never liked her. That's not true, I said. I stayed quiet for years. What? That doesn't mean. I stayed quiet when she interrupted me, when she spoke for you, when she erased me in public, I said evenly. That wasn't dislike, that was restraint. He stood up abruptly and began pacing. So what, you think she married me for the house? I think she knew the house existed, I said, and that it was important. He stopped pacing. That's not the same thing. No, I agreed, but it's close enough to ask questions. He looked down at the table again, at the papers spread out like a map he didn't recognize anymore. She loves me, he said, quieter now. I hope she does, I replied, but love doesn't erase patterns. That was when his hands started to shake. He sat back down slowly. Why are you showing me this now? What? Because you're being pushed into decisions without full information, I said. And because once lawyers and courts get involved, your choices get smaller. His eyes snapped up. In courts. Only if things continue the way they are, I replied. I'd prefer they don't. He stared at me, breathing uneven. She said you were trying to control us. I met his gaze. If I wanted control, I would have used it years ago. That landed. The room felt heavy now, the air thick with unspoken realizations. His denial had softened into uncertainty, uncertainty into fear. Finally, he asked the question he'd been avoiding. What do I do? I didn't answer immediately. First, I said, you stop assuming this is about loyalty, it's about clarity. He nodded faintly. Second, I continued, you need to hear this from both sides at the same time. His eyes widened. You want to confront her. I want transparency, I said, no private narratives, no filters. He hesitated. She'll explode. Then you'll learn something important, I replied. He looked down at the documents one last time, then pushed them back toward me. Okay, he said quietly, set it up. I felt no victory, no satisfaction, just gravity. When he asked, soon, I replied, before this turns into something none of us can control. He stood, shoulders slumped, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he paused. Dad, he said without turning around, if this is true. I waited. Everything changes. Yes, I said, that's why I waited until now. What? After he left, I gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. My hands were steady. The truth was no longer hidden, it was shared. And once truth enters the room, it doesn't sit quietly in the corner, it demands to be addressed. The meeting was inevitable now. 3 people, 1 house, no more silence. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be softened by misunderstanding. It would be decided in the open. We met on a Sunday afternoon. Neutral ground. A quiet conference room Elaine had arranged, the kind with frosted glass walls and a long table that made everyone sit a little straighter than usual. No home field advantage, no audience, just 3 chairs facing each other and the truth waiting in the middle. Vanessa arrived first. She looked composed, perfect posture, careful makeup, phone placed face down like she was already prepared to be interrupted. When I walked in, she didn't stand. She smiled politely, the way people do when they're already rehearsing what they plan to say. Caleb came in last. He looked exhausted. He took the seat between us without saying a word, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the table. For the first time in a long while, he didn't look like someone trying to keep the peace. He looked like someone bracing for impact. I'm glad we're all here, Vanessa began. This has gone far enough. I nodded. I agree. She blinked, clearly expecting resistance. I think we should clear the air, she continued, because a lot of accusations have been floating around. Facts, I said calmly. Not accusations. Her jaw tightened. You've been digging into my past. I've been responding to the present, I replied. She turned to Caleb. You see what I mean? This is exactly what I've been talking about. Caleb didn't respond. I placed a folder on the table and slid it forward, not toward Vanessa but toward my son. Caleb, I said gently, before anything else is said, there's something you need to hear clearly. Vanessa laughed once, sharp. This again. The house, I continued, ignoring her, is not in your name. Silence. Vanessa's smile froze. What are you talking about? She asked. It never was, I said, and it still is. Caleb lifted his head slowly. He already knew this part, but hearing it aloud changed the weight of it. That's impossible, Vanessa snapped. We've lived there for years. I know, I said, but living somewhere and owning it are not the same thing. She turned to Caleb, eyes wide. You said this was handled. He swallowed. I assumed it was. That assumption, I said, is what created this situation. Vanessa stood abruptly, palms pressing into the table. You let us believe. I let you live there, I corrected. I never misrepresented ownership. That's manipulation, she shot back. No, I said evenly, that's documentation. Her voice rose. You used money to control us. If I wanted control, I replied, I would have used it long before now. Caleb finally spoke. Vanessa, did you know the deed never changed? She hesitated just for a second. That was all it took. You knew, he said quietly. She turned on him. Of course I knew it was temporary. Temporary for who, he asked. For us to get settled, she snapped. For security. For separation, I asked calmly, her head whipped toward me. Excuse me. I slid one page across the table, the title inquiry, the date circled. Caleb stared at it. Vanessa didn't. That means nothing, she said quickly. I was asking questions. Months before any conflict, I said. Before inspections, before boundaries. She laughed again, louder this time. You planned this, both of you. Caleb stood up. Did you plan to leave? Her face flushed. How dare you? Answer me, he said. His voice shook, but he didn't back down. She threw her hands up. I was protecting myself from him. She pointed at me. That's your answer, Caleb asked. That you married me for protection. I married you for stability, she said, and you know what, I deserve it. The room went still. There it was, no apology, no denial, just justification. Caleb sank back into his chair, staring at the floor. I watched him carefully. This wasn't my moment, it was his. Choose, I said softly. Vanessa spun toward me. You don't get to say that. I do, I replied, because this isn't about sides, it's about reality. She turned back to Caleb, her voice sharp now. If you don't shut this down right now, we're done. He looked up at her slowly. Something in his expression changed. Not anger, clarity. I need time, he said. She scoffed. Time for what? To think, he replied, without threats. Her control slipped completely then. You're really going to let him do this? She shouted, after everything I've done for you. I stood up. Enough, I said. She turned on me, eyes blazing. This isn't over. No, I agreed calmly. It's just finally honest. She grabbed her bag chair, screeching loudly against the floor. You'll regret this, she snapped, storming toward the door. As it slammed shut behind her, the silence that followed was different from before, not heavy, clear. Caleb stayed seated, head in his hands, breathing hard. I didn't move, I didn't speak, because some moments need space to land. And as the echo of that door faded, one thing was undeniable. The choice had been forced, and the explosion had only just begun. The sheriff arrived on a Wednesday morning. Not early, not dramatic. Just after 9, when the neighborhood was awake enough to notice but not busy enough to ignore what was happening. I wasn't there, that was intentional. Elaine had warned me not to be. Let the process speak for itself, she said. Your presence would only add emotion. So I waited at home, coffee untouched, phone face down on the table. When it rang, I knew exactly why. It's done, Elaine said. Notice delivered. I closed my eyes briefly. How did it go? She exhaled loud. According to the report, the sheriff parked directly in front of the house. Uniform visible, clipboard in hand, routine, professional. Vanessa answered the door. At first she thought it was a mistake, then she read the paper, her voice carried. Neighbors stepped onto porches. A jogger slowed down. Someone across the street pretended to check their mail for far longer than necessary. Vanessa shouted that it was harassment, that this was illegal, that no one had the right. The sheriff didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated the facts and pointed to the signature line. Caleb arrived halfway through. He pulled into the driveway, saw the patrol car, and stopped short. He didn't get out right away. He just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, watching his life rearrange itself in public. Vanessa turned on him the moment she saw him. This is your fault, she screamed. You let him do this. Caleb didn't shout back, he didn't say anything. That silence, his silence, was the loudest thing on the street. The sheriff finished explaining timelines, options. Legal language stripped of emotion. Vanessa tore the notice in half and threw it on the ground. The sheriff calmly handed her another copy. That was the moment the reality finally landed. This wasn't a conversation, it was authority. By the time the patrol car pulled away, the damage was done, not to the house but to the illusion of control Vanessa had been operating under. I learned all of this later, piece by piece, from Elaine, from a neighbor who texted a mutual friend. From Caleb himself hours after it happened. Everyone saw, he said quietly over the phone, everyone. I'm sorry, I replied. There was a long pause. I don't think you are, he said, not accusing, just stating. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, I clarified. I'm not sorry it happened. He exhaled. Neither am I not anymore. That surprised me. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, the process continues. Vanessa didn't stay in the house that night. She packed a bag and left before sunset, slamming doors and making sure anyone within earshot knew she'd been wronged. She posted again, this time angrier, less careful, but something had changed. The comments weren't as supportive. Some people asked questions, others stayed quiet. Public stories don't age well once paperwork enters the picture. Caleb stayed behind. He didn't call me. He didn't ask for help. He slept on the couch, surrounded by boxes and half-finished renovations that suddenly looked like liabilities instead of upgrades. That evening, Elaine sent me one final update. She's contesting, she said. Claiming emotional distress, improper notice, the usual. And I asked, she doesn't have a case, Elaine replied, but she does have a court date. I nodded. When's? 2 weeks. I hung up and sat back in my chair. 2 weeks. For years, everything had been vague, emotional, interpreted, softened by family ties and unspoken expectations. Now there was a date, a room, a judge, no narratives, no filters, no social media sympathy, just facts. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel excited. I felt steady. Because when authority arrives, it doesn't ask who feels hurt. It asks who is responsible. And in 2 weeks, that question would be answered out loud, in a place where shouting doesn't change outcomes. The street would forget what it saw that morning. Neighbors always do. But for the people involved, nothing would ever feel the same again. The stage was set. And the next time Vanessa spoke, it wouldn't be to an audience she could control. It would be to a judge. The court date was set, and with it, the final turning point. The judge didn't pause. She didn't sigh, lean back, or ask for clarification the way people do when emotions muddy the facts. She listened. She reviewed the documents. She asked a few direct questions, all of them answered cleanly by paperwork that had been prepared long before feelings entered the room. Vanessa spoke first. She talked about emotional harm, about feeling unsafe, about manipulation disguised as generosity. Her voice rose and fell at all the right moments, practiced from weeks of explaining herself online. The judge let her finish. Then she turned to Elaine. Elaine stood calm and precise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize anything. She walked the court through timelines, ownership records, inspection reports, and notice procedures, dates, signatures, facts. When she finished, the judge nodded once and looked directly at Vanessa. You were not the legal owner of the property, she said. You were a resident. Permission was revoked through proper legal channels. Vanessa tried to interrupt. The judge raised one hand. I'm not finished. The room went still. Renovations were performed without authorization or permits, the judge continued. Liability rests with the occupants, not the owner. Vanessa's face drained of color. This court finds no evidence of harassment or coercion, the judge concluded. Only enforcement of ownership rights. She looked down at her notes, then back up. Motion denied. It was over. Vanessa sat frozen, lips parted, eyes darting as if waiting for someone to rescue her from the outcome she'd insisted wasn't possible. Then the judge spoke again. Given the costs incurred due to unauthorized alterations and legal resistance, the court awards fees to the property owner. Elaine squeezed my arm gently, status reversal. Vanessa didn't shout this time, she didn't cry, she simply stared ahead, hollowed out by the realization that control had finally left her hands. The judge stood. Court adjourned. Outside, Vanessa stormed past us without a word, heels striking the floor hard enough to echo. Her confidence was gone. In its place was something raw and unguarded. Fear. Caleb didn't follow her. He stood beside me silent, watching her disappear through the glass doors. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I didn't know, he said finally. His voice cracked. I really didn't. I know, I replied. She told me this would never happen, he said, that you were bluffing. I looked at him. I never bluffs. He nodded slowly, absorbing that truth. I need time, he said, away from everything. You should take it, I replied. He hesitated. Can I come by later? I didn't answer right away. Yes, I said finally, you can. He let out a breath he'd been holding for weeks. Vanessa never looked back. Caleb walked out of the courthouse alone. I stayed a moment longer, watching people file past, lawyers, clerks, strangers with their own quiet battles. The world didn't stop for us, it rarely does, but something inside me had settled. Justice hadn't been loud, it hadn't been cruel, it had been efficient. As I stepped outside into the afternoon sun, my phone buzzed with a message. Can we talk tonight, just us? It was from Caleb. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked up at the sky. The house was no longer the center of this story. My son was. And for the first time in a long while, he was walking toward me on his own. The next chapter wouldn't be about ownership or courts. It would be about what happens after truth leaves nowhere else to hide. Caleb was coming back. Alone. Caleb came over the next evening, no announcement, no hesitation, just a quiet knock at the door that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. When I opened it, he stood there empty-handed. No bags, no excuses, just himself. "I'm not staying," he said immediately. "I just needed to see you." I stepped aside. "Come in." He followed me into the living room and sat down slowly, like someone unsure whether the ground beneath him was stable. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't tense, it was fragile. "I'm sorry," he said finally, not rushed, not defensive, just honest. "I should have spoken up," he continued, staring at his hands. "I should have stopped it sooner. I kept telling myself things would calm down if I stayed quiet." I nodded. "That's a common mistake." He looked up. I thought peace meant not rocking the boat. "And now?" I asked. "Now I see it just meant letting someone else steer," he replied. That answer mattered. He told me everything after that, how small decisions turned into habits, how letting Vanessa take the lead felt easier than pushing back, how slowly he'd stopped recognizing his own voice. "I didn't realize I was disappearing," he said, "until I watched you disappear first." That landed harder than any apology. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added quickly. I want to fix what I can." "Then start with yourself," I said, "not with me." He nodded. "I've already scheduled therapy." That surprised me. "Individual," he added, "and maybe family if you're open to it." What? I didn't answer right away. "I'm open," I said eventually, "when you're ready to listen as much as you speak." He smiled faintly. "I am." We talked for hours that night, about his childhood, about my mistakes, about how love doesn't excuse silence and how silence, when misused, becomes betrayal. When he left, he hugged me, really hugged me, the kind that lingers just long enough to mean something. "I don't want the house," he said at the door. "Not anymore." "I know," I replied. A week later, I listed it, not out of anger, not to prove a point, but because symbols matter. The house had stopped being a home the moment it was used as leverage. Keeping it would have meant holding onto a chapter that had already ended. When the realtor asked why I was selling, I told her the truth. "I'm simplifying." The offers came quickly, good ones. I chose one that felt clean and final. On closing day, I stood in the empty living room one last time. Sunlight spilled across the floor where furniture used to be. Walls that had held tension now echoed quietly. I didn't feel loss, I felt release. Caleb helped me close the door behind us. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" I asked. "For showing me that love doesn't mean surrender," he replied. We went our separate ways after that, not disconnected but independent, a healthier distance. Intentional, honest. That night, sitting alone in my house, I realized something important. I hadn't won a house, I'd regained a relationship. And sometimes that's the only victory that matters, but endings are rarely the end. They're thresholds. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Anticipation. The house was gone. The conflict was resolved. The silence had done its work. Now there was space, and in that space something new was beginning to form. I didn't know what it would look like yet, but for the first time in a long while I was looking forward instead of back. A new life was waiting, and I was finally ready to step into it. Silence gave me back something I didn't realize I'd been missing. Not the quiet kind that fills a room when people stop talking, but the deeper kind. The kind that settles inside you when you're no longer bracing for the next confrontation, the next explanation, the next moment where you have to justify your existence to someone who's already decided your value. After the house sold, after the court date faded into memory, my days became slower. Not empty, intentional. I woke up without tension in my shoulders. I drank my coffee without checking my phone first. I walked through my neighborhood and noticed things I'd been too distracted to see before, the way the morning light hit the trees, the sound of a screen door down the block, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing without me needing to manage it. Caleb called once a week, sometimes twice. No urgency, no crisis, just updates, therapy sessions, small realizations. Awkward moments where he caught himself about to stay quiet and chose not to. "I didn't know how loud silence could be," he told me once. I smiled. "It depends how you use it." We didn't rush to rebuild what had been broken. We let it take a new shape. One built on choice instead of obligation, on respect instead of expectation. That was the real shift. For years, I'd believed respect came automatically with age, sacrifice, and support. That if you showed up enough times, people would naturally honor your place. That belief cost me more than I realized. Respect isn't inherited, it isn't guaranteed, and it certainly isn't permanent. It has to be reinforced, sometimes quietly, sometimes firmly, but always clearly. Vanessa disappeared from our lives completely. No messages, no posts. No apologies. I didn't wonder about her anymore. When people leave without looking back, they usually do so because there's nothing left for them to take, and that was fine. The hardest part of all of this hadn't been the legal process or the public embarrassment or even the betrayal. It had been accepting my own role in allowing it to happen. I had taught people how to treat me by what I tolerated. I had confused patience with permission. I had believed that staying quiet made me noble when in reality it had simply made me convenient. Silence when chosen consciously is powerful. Silence when used to avoid discomfort is costly. That distinction changed everything. I started saying no more often, calmly, without explanation, without apology. I declined invitations that felt obligatory. I corrected people when they spoke for me. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't disappear either. The result surprised me. People adjusted, some drifted away, others leaned in. The ones who mattered stayed and treated me differently. Better. One afternoon, while sorting through old files, I found the original paperwork for the house. The deed, the signatures, the date. I stared at it for a long time before placing it in the shredder. That chapter was closed. I wasn't defined by what I owned anymore, or what I'd lost, or what I'd reclaimed. I was defined by what I refused to give up again. My dignity, my voice, my place, those aren't negotiable. That evening, Caleb came over for dinner. He cooked. We talked about nothing important, sports, weather, a book he was reading. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Dad," he said, hesitating, "there's something I never asked you." I waited. "Why didn't you fight harder at the beginning?" he asked. "Why didn't you just shut it down right away?" I considered the question carefully. "Because fighting would have made it about power," I said, "and I needed it to be about truth." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad you waited," he said. "So am I," I replied. After he left, I stood in the quiet house, lights low, air still. I didn't feel lonely, I felt complete. But as I turned off the lamp and headed upstairs, a thought surfaced, one that tied everything together. Silence hadn't just given me peace. It had revealed who was willing to meet me there, and who never intended to. That was the final truth, and it was enough. I didn't lose the door, that's what I finally understood. For a long time, I thought the door was something other people controlled. That if they decided when it opened or closed, my role was to wait outside and hope to be invited back in. That belief followed me through years of compromise, silence, and quiet endurance. But standing in my home one early morning, sunlight stretching across the floor, I realized how wrong that had been. A door isn't owned by the person who slams it shut. It's owned by the one who decides whether to knock again. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind in documents or accounts. It's about what you refuse to abandon inside yourself. The line you draw when convenience asks you to shrink. The moment you choose dignity over access. I thought about my father and how he'd handled conflict with firmness, not volume, with clarity, not force. I hadn't fully understood him back then. I do now. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors with conditions. They say you're welcome here, but not at the cost of my self-respect. That lesson didn't come from victory in court or financial leverage. It came from restraint, from waiting long enough to let truth surface without being pushed. From trusting that calm decisions outlast emotional ones. Caleb and I still talk regularly, not because we're obligated, but because we choose to. Our relationship is quieter now, steadier, honest in a way it never was before, and that matters more to me than any property ever could. I don't replay the past anymore. I don't wonder what I should have done differently. Every step, every pause led me here, to a place where I know who I am, to a life where I don't need to argue to be heard, to a door I never lost. When someone tells you to leave, sometimes the strongest move is knowing who still owns the door. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been tested by family, silence, or self-respect, subscribe for more stories of quiet justice.